Hello and welcome to the Holographic Podcast. I'm your host, Tony D, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kyle, the salty dog, and this is the Holographic Baldcast. How are you, Kyle?
Pretty good, Tone. Good to see you. Happy holidays and Merry New Year.
Merry New Year to you. Happy winter solstice.
Yeah.
And we're moving back towards the sun in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah. Happy about that.
Me too. Absolutely. We have a fun show for you today. Thanks for joining us. This is the Dune Show. We are going to do a book review, an all-around review of Dune, the novel by Frank Herbert. Just a fantastic book. In my opinion, it's one of the most important books of the 20th century. It's one of my favorite books. It's an amazing science fiction book, but it's also just an amazing book. So first, before we get into it, I just want to say I give this book 2 thumbs up as one of the best books of all time. What do you give Dune, Kyle?
How many thumbs are we allowed to give?
Infinite.
I'm going to give it infinite thumbs. Mirroring what you said, echoing what you said, it really is just a remarkable book. It's not overly long, but it's complex and imaginative and exciting and adventurous. It's dark. It's all of these things put together and so much more, really. It was astoundingly rich.
Yeah, so much more. It's such a it covers so much, and we're going to talk about as much as we can. But before, so if you haven't read it, go read it and enjoy it. But before we go any further, spoiler alerts. We're going to talk about the plot. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff with it. I'm going to talk about the extended Dune Universe, as Frank Herbert wrote 5 sequels past that. So he wrote 6 books, and then his son Brian Herbert and another guy, Kevin Anderson, wrote a bunch of books to in the universe of Dune, the Duneverse that I call it, before, thousands of years before, and after, 1,000 years after, or whatever. So spoilers, we're going to talk all about it. So and there's a new Dune movie coming out. Kyle's aware of it. He posted something about it a few months ago. It looks really cool. If you want to see the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, and if you don't like that sort of thing, then this might not be the show for you. But if you want to learn more about Dune, and you've read it before, then stick with us and we're going to talk about it. That movie looks pretty cool, Kyle. When's that coming out? Is it next year, this year?
I thought it was coming out this summer. I believe it was originally slated to come out already. Maybe even this time, sort of a holiday movie. But I think it got pushed back because of COVID.
Right.
I believe production is done or close to being completed. But yeah, I think they sort of strung it out a little bit long because they knew that it wouldn't be well received because nobody's doing anything.
Right. Yeah, and they've done. There was a movie made before. We'll talk about that later. And there's also been, I think there was a miniseries. There's like a TV show. So there's been some attempts at putting it on screen, but so far those attempts are nowhere near the book. I mean, there's certain things, like some things they make a screen adaptation of books and it's fun and great, but nothing is even close to the book of Dune. So let's talk about it. All right, let's get into it. Let's get into the Duneverse.
Okay.
So Dune takes place in the future, takes place in a human future. And it's really interesting, actually, because I was showing Kyle, I was talking about an afterword written by his son. And actually his son, Frank Herbert, the author's son, mentions there's no aliens in Dune. They're in the entire Duneverse, in the book, there's no aliens. It's all it's all about humans and humans experience and changes in the universe, and there's no aliens. It's really weird because you think there are, because there's such strange human things that happen, but there's no aliens, there's no extraterrestrials. Really interesting. Yeah,
that is quite interesting. I've actually, even after many times as I've read it and thought about it, I've never really given that much contemplation and how unique that is. especially because, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think this is the way the show is going to go. We'll use hand signals. But one of the things I wanted to tack onto that was that one thing that I like about it is that it not only is it set in the future, but it's set far into the future, which I think a lot of times science fiction novels or fiction novels or movies, science fiction movies or movies about the future, they go 50, 100, 200, 500 years into the future. I think this one is like 8 to 10,000 years into the future or something like that without knowing
So
exactly.
the other books in the Duneverse, they kind of explain that. In the other books, they explain that so the Butlerian Jihad was 10,000 years before the book takes place, but that event is like 20 or 30,000 years after they left Earth.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so it's like 50,000 years into our future.
I always thought that was really unique. And if you just read the first book as opposed to going into the extended Duneverse, you understand that and it registers, but there's really a lot of depth right there that's not totally covered, but already you're dealing with something that's very, very expansive.
Absolutely. And so in my own head, so I'm thinking, there's the sandworms, right? So the sandworms are obviously extraterrestrial life. So there is, it's pretty clear that if we go to other planets, and in Dune, they go to other planets, and there's like they call it the Landsrat. It's a group of royals. It's
An aristocracy.
an aristocracy, and there's an emperor, and the emperor rules surrounding space and on these other planets. So there's life on the planets. There's just not sentient life. There's not like intelligent aliens, but there's the sandworms, which are a pretty big central piece of the book and of the entire Dune universe. And so that's an alien life form, but it's very human in the way he does it, because it has to do with the spice. It has to do with a drug, right? And so
you're throwing out all sorts of terms, which is great because I know what they are.
but no one else does.
But I think you should start at the beginning, and we should give our synopsis as briefly as we can.
You're right. So
and then cover stuff.
You're right.
This is hard, man.
It's hard. I know. It's so giant.
This is already way harder than I thought it was going to be.
Absolutely. Talking about Dune is like talking about the entire universe. That's why we're doing this show. I like to go deep into the universe. Dune is it's like the universe. So we're in the future, right? So Dune starts in the far human future, and there's an aristocracy. There's a group. There's an emperor, and he rules surrounding space. And there's multiple planets, and there's dukes and earls and all these guys that are ruling the planets. And one of these planets in this system is called Arrakis, or Dune, and it's a desert planet. And Arrakis is where they find something called the spice. And spice, or melange, as they call it in the book, is a drug. And humans take this drug to do a lot of things. They put it in coffee, and they put it in food, and they just take pills, and it does what drugs do. It enhances you, and so the spice enhances you, and it's very valuable. It's a very important commodity in the Duneverse, and as we find out later in the book, it's basically the reason how they have space travel. So I'll drop that in there right now. In the synopsis is they space travel. There's a group of dudes. I'm gonna say dudes because it's like a men's club called the Guild, the Spacing Guild, and they fold space. They use the Holtzman engines, which I don't know if you're familiar with that term. That's in the other books. The Holtzman engines drive it, but the guild members see how to fold space and how to travel through space, and they use the spice. They need the spice to do that. And so that's one part of human consciousness has developed into the Spacing Guild. And on the opposite end of that, there's a group of women who form something called the Bene Gesserit. And the Bene Gesserit are enhanced female they call themselves witches kind of, but they're not witches. They're just enhanced females basically. And they, God, how to describe the Bene Gesserit? They basically, they have enhanced fighting abilities and enhanced thinking abilities. They're truth sayers. They do all these cool things. They're the sisterhood. That's a good term. They're a sisterhood, and they try and control things around them. They actually have a breeding program where they breed the royals, and they breed all the high aristocracy to 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 an end game. And we'll talk about that end game in a little bit. So you have this cool setup where it's in the future, and you have the Spacing Guild, and you have the Bene Gesserit, and you have these planets, and you have Dune, and then you have a planet called Caladan, which is where the Duke Leto Atreides lives, and he's got a son, Paul Atreides, and his wife, the Lady Jessica, is a Bene Gesserit, and they have been ordered by the Emperor.
Not
Yes,
his
Kyle.
wife.
Oh, you're absolutely right. My mistake. His concubine, right? Right. Because he couldn't marry her for some reason. I can't remember.
Because of all the complicated nonsense involving royal houses and
Right.
such.
Right.
But he did produce an heir for him.
Right. A male heir, which she wasn't supposed to do from the Bene Gesserit. So it's there's so many interesting little layers to this book that have to do with politics that is really it's really about the human experience. You know, like a basic novel wouldn't even care about that sort of thing. But Dune, it's like everything is important. Every teeny little thing in human existence is important. And that's what's so cool about Dune, is even though it's fiction, it's so real. It's so real. So you have this Duke Leto Atreides. He's on Caladan, and he's been ordered by the Emperor to go take over Arrakis, to go to Dune, and that's going to be his new fief, his new fiefdom, which means that he's going to be in charge of Dune. So he's got to go from his planet his planet Caladan to Arrakis and take over. And so he's an Atreides, and the existing leader of Arrakis, the guy who's in charge of Arrakis, is the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and the Harkonnens are the enemies of the Atreides. So the Emperor is kicking out the Baron Harkonnen and putting Duke Leto in charge of this really important commodity. And so that's this crazy setup. That's how the novel starts. It sets it up with this palace intrigue and this really interesting change in the Duniverse. So you have some main characters, which are Leto Atreides and his concubine Jessica, who's a Bene Gesserit, and his son Paul Atreides. You have the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and then you have these people surrounding the Atreides, like Thufir Hawat, who's a Mentat, who uses his human mind like a computer, which is a good point. So in the Dune in Dune, in the original book, they have kicked out all thinking machines. It talks about 10,000 years prior, there was something called the Butlerian Jihad, which was a war to destroy all thinking machines. And we find out later about that in later books and in different Duniverse books. But for now, we don't know a whole lot about it. It just kind of touches on it. So there's no thinking machines in this world. You know, they're in space. It's 30,000 years in the future, and there's no AI. There's no thinking machines because there was some issue with them, and they're like, no, let's get rid of them. So that's why humans have to develop certain abilities. That's why you have the Spacing Guild, which had to develop abilities to fold space. That's why you have the Bene Gesserit, who created extreme fighting and mental abilities, because there's no thinking machines to do it for them. So there's a character called Thufir Hawat. He's a he's a Mentat, and that's someone who does computer calculations in their brain. And you have Duncan Idaho, who's a master swords master, or a Ginaz sword master, I think that's what they call him. And you have who else? There's Duncan Idaho. There's Thufir Hawat.
Gurney Halleck, Master of Assassins.
Yeah, Gurney Halleck, Master of Assassins. Yeah, Gurney Halleck, awesome, amazing character. He's just basically he protects the Atreides. He's an Atreides ally, and he travels. a master of arms, though you said.
Man at arms.
Man at arms. Yeah, he's an Atreides man at arms. So you have these amazing characters, and they're getting ready to do this change where they're going to go from planet to planet to take over. Whew, that's this book is so cool, and there's so much to it, and I love talking about it. But I want to switch it over to Kyle because it's just like it's all rattling around in my head. So that kind of sets it up. So Kyle, what happens next? Bring us what happens next.
You got the easy job there. Now I have to remember the details.
Don't worry about the details. Give us the big plot.
I'm going to try. So it's set up like Tony said, and the Atreides know that it's fishy. So they go into it sort of understanding that there's danger. But the amount of power that they're going to be able to wield after, if they manage to outfox the fox, so to speak, is too tempting to turn down. So it's a risk versus reward thing for them. And so the only way that the emperor and or the powers that are working against House Atreides are able to get done what they're able to get done is through treachery. So that plays a large part in this whole transition. But basically, they take on the fiefdom of Dune, and they go, and some terrible things happen. And there is treachery. There is
I think it's okay. I think it's okay to be specific. Just be specific. We gave spoilers. Let's just do
sure.
it.
No, yeah, okay. Well, the thing is I'm just trying to be brief.
Well, just say it. Like the Duke Leto gets killed.
Right. So, but yes, he does. I'm sorry. I thought I was talking. No, that's fine. Keep doing that. Leto gets killed. It's true. But before he does, though, even in the brief time before he gets killed, he already proves to the people that are on Arrakis that are not leaving with House Harkonnen that he is a far better ruler, leader, and he establishes in some important places a certain bit of loyalty and or attractiveness to House Atreides. It's kind of like, imagine like in Washington, if you were a staffer, a long-term staffer, and you see presidential administrations come and go, right? And a terrible administration goes, and an incoming administration comes in, and that administration gives you some bit of hope. I sort of looked at it that way, as some of the characters on Arrakis felt
kind of like what might be happening in like a week.
I hope so. I mean, let's face it. Joe Biden is no Duke Atreides.
He sure isn't.
I'm sorry.
but our current president is kind of like Baron Vladimir Harkonnen.
So. Very much so. Very much so. So yes, so Tony's right. So there's treachery and terrible things happen. The Duke gets killed. His house is in shambles. Paul and his mother escape to the desert, which we haven't even mentioned. The people on Dune, not the Harkonnens and not the Atreides. They're called the Fremen. And basically the spacing, the Langstrad, the Emperor, the Harkonnens, the Atreides, everybody just looks at these people as sort of like, the Native Americans of the planet, except for one small difference. They exist in far greater numbers than anybody thought, and they're way more powerful than anybody thought, and they're secretive and imaginative and really tough, and their fighting prowess is unparalleled, and nobody knows that. So when the Atreides arrive there, they sort of get a glimpse, an inkling of that, and it turns out that Paul, the son of the Duke, and the Lady Jessica has powers of observation and prescient abilities that are far, far more advanced than even his closest people realized. They always knew he was a smart lad. They always knew he had extra powers of perception and swordsmanship and wisdom, but as soon as he arrives on Dune and he starts taking the spice in, just through, like Tony said, through coffee and food, he undergoes this really rapid change, and he starts having these insane visions of the future that allow him to plot out this course line, or this course, or at least see a possible path towards a future that is much greater than just the simple switchover from house to house and the wielding of power under the umbrella of the emperor. And Paul starts to see things as a universal revolution. And he starts to understand that he may, in fact, hold within his hands and have within his grasp a power that's never really, he's got the power to control the universe. And that comes because of his realization that he will ally with the Fremen and basically control Arrakis. And if he controls Arrakis, he controls the universe, because, as Tony alluded, the spice is required for space travel. It's required for the Bene Gesserit's breeding programs and abilities. It's required for even just the ordinary daily lives of small people who are addicted to this spice for what it does to them. And I know the original book doesn't really get into your average person. It's not like they're strung out drug users or anything like that. It doesn't go down that way. But the simple fact is that space travel is impossible without it. The Bene Gesserit breeding program, impossible without it. So basically, Paul starts to realize this, and he's now a refugee. And he escapes with his mother to the desert, and everything is hanging on a thread, because the Fremen basically just kill people like him and Jessica. When they find somebody from the city or something out in the desert, they have no real allegiance to them. They're on their own program, which is a whole nother sort of thing. And I think maybe I'll let Tony talk about that briefly, and then that'll bring us to the execution of the rest of the book, which should kind of go fairly rapidly, because maybe we won't have to go too far into the details of it, because we gave, basically that's, yeah.
It's so, I hope the audience can see it. It's very fun for us to talk about this. It's such a fun book, but it's so rich and it's so cool. So if we seem like little giddy little school kids talking about this, it's because we are. It's because it's such a cool, fun book, and but it's so important. So it's both of those. It's a fun read, but it's also really, really important, and you can really learn a lot, and it enriches so much. So Kyle talked about Paul realizing his abilities, Paul Atreides, right? One of the reasons why he realizes his abilities is because he is the Kwisatz Haderach, I think that's how you say it, which is the culmination of this Bene Gesserit breeding program, but he wasn't supposed to be. His mother was ordered by her Bene Gesserit masters to produce a female, and that female was supposed to go and breed, and then it was the Kwisatz Haderach was supposed to be the next generation or 2 generations later. But she wanted to she wanted to please her duke, she wanted to please her mate, and she gave him a son against the orders of the Bene Gesserit. And so that's why the Bene Gesserit are a little bit freaked out about him. They don't know. So the Kwisatz Haderach is supposed to be this person, a male, who's able to do special things that the female Bene Gesserit cannot do. The female Bene Gesserit are very powerful, super powerful beings, super powerful humans, and they control a lot of things, and they have all this prescient abilities with their minds. But the book also is realistic. Like, it doesn't say that females need a male. It just says that females are different from males, and so the male can do something different that the females couldn't do, which is look in this crazy place that the female minds couldn't go for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but you'll have to read it.
A little bit of latent paternal supremacy there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's the author's cultural this and that, whatever. But I'm just saying that like the author isn't like, oh, they need this male. It was more like the females are super powerful and they want this male super being to do something for them, and they want to control them, or they want to control this super being, this guy. And this guy turns out possibly to be Paul Atreides, but they can't control him because he was raised by the Duke Leto, not raised by the Bene Gesserit.
Just as an aside, because I thought of something that might clarify something to any fool that's watching this that wants to have the book ruined for them through our terrible description, which is that one of the reasons why Paul and Jessica are actually able to survive this crux moment where they end up in the wilderness as refugees and they could be murdered immediately by the Fremen, but are not, is because in addition to this centuries-old breeding program by the Bene Gesserit, they also had what was called the Missionaria Protectiva,
Right.
which was like a religious propaganda campaign that they threw out to the far ends of the planets in the universe to basically support their cause. And so they have the Fremen indoctrinated into this program on like sort of like a very subliminal level, so that certain cues that are given off by Paul and Jessica match with this prophecy that they put out, the Missionaria Protectiva, which I don't know what that means in Latin, but it sounds like the protective mission to me. And so it fulfills what it does. So there's this moment where they end up in a cave in the far desert, and the Fremen, who are totally on top of them, they say, all right, let's just kill them and leave. And it turns out that because of her Bene Gesserit training and her Bene Gesserit training of Paul, that wasn't quite as easy to do. So they go to do it, but the two of them, they best them, and it's not so simple. It's not just a swift mercy killing. So there's one of the first flags where the Fremen say to themselves, well, maybe this is the person that these are the people that we've been waiting for that are going to deliver us to where we want to go. And their plan is a whole nother thing, which is changing the face of Arrakis and turning it from desert to green. And that's a whole nother story.
Okay. And yeah, that's another layer. Well, and so it's a desert planet, and there's these giant worms that travel through the desert planet under the sand, like giant worms. Like in the book, they're supposed to be like, the size of a building. Like how would you, how the size of these worms?
Hundreds of meters long.
Like bigger than blue whales, like blue whales are giant in the ocean. These worms are like bigger than blue whales, like travel, like much bigger than blue whales traveling through the desert. And so the Fremen use these worms. They actually catch them and ride them. But everyone else is freaked out. Every outsider, every other, the people controlling the world hate these giant sandworms because the sandworms are a threat to the people harvesting the spice. So these worms are a big part of this story, and they're actually a giant part of the later stories in the later Dune Universe. So you have these worms, these giant sandworms on this desert planet, and the spice that is connected to these sandworms, but the Fremen want to change this desert planet into a water planet. But so that's going to have serious ecological repercussions for not just the Fremen, but for the sandworms. It's really interesting, and it's really crazy. So
they're tired of the hard life in the desert. Right. They want to turn a hard life into a paradise, and that whole notion, I don't know who put that notion into their head. That wasn't part of the Missionaria Protectiva. That
I don't know.
Was that the work?
Oh, was it Leet Keynes? Yeah, Pardot Keynes.
Pardot Keynes.
Yeah. He's a royal ecologist.
Imperial planetologist.
But they've obviously been working to that aim for a while, because they have gathered moisture in these catches around the planet. But that's been happening for a while, right?
I think so. I don't know though. I think they did a lot of work in a very short amount of time. Is what actually happened. That's what I think. I think
Based on this guy, Imperial planetologist.
who realizes right when he gets there, and
Yeah.
this is stuff that's actually coming out of the appendix. But I'm just going to take this moment to briefly speak about. We're trying to sort of bludgeon this book into a into a synopsis.
Which is
We probably should
impossible.
have read a professional synopsis before we did this. But regardless, or irregardless, or disirregardless, whichever your preferred nomenclature is.
Get to the point, Kyle.
Yeah, yes. One of the things that Tony and I like most about this book is that there are really interesting underlying themes. So, we've talked about palace intrigue, and we've talked about ecology. So there's politics, there's ecology, there's religion, there's propaganda, there is the science of space travel, and then he gets into weaponry,
Drugs,
and drugs, and
hallucinogens,
criminology.
prescience.
There's a prison planet. There's psychology, prescience, future, telling of the future. So there's all these things that sort of that they have very lofty parts of them, but they're also super totally grounded in your either everyday human experience. We all live under the guise of politics and ecology and religion. But he does it in a way where he's taking you right to the pinnacle of all these themes, and he's putting you in this place where you get to oversee it happening on so many different levels and see the way these giant themes interconnect. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind, that's one of the reasons why we're having so much trouble shoehorning all this stuff together, is because the depth of this book is so it's there. There's a lot of depth, and there's a lot of intrigue, and the way he writes it is amazing. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing this book on this show, and we'll do different books and different stuff. But this book, for the first book we're reviewing on the show, is because all these themes, this is exactly what we talk about on the show. This is stuff that I love. This is stuff that I think is so important, that all the stuff you just said, religion and politics and, psychology and all the stuff relating to our existence. That's what we've been talking about for podcast after podcast. Oh, this is only podcast number 8. I'm still a podcast baby. We're still getting our feet wet, and we're still having fun, and we're still trying things out. But that's the theme of the show. That's what we like to do, is examine these things in our world. Now, even though this is a fictional world, it's very important to delve into these, and this book helps you to delve into this from a fictional standpoint so you can relate it to reality. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, but for now, all those things are there. So how can you talk about the universe in one show? So it's one book, but it's an entire universe, so it's difficult. It's hard to talk about it in one show.
Okay, so that's what happened, and we've got the lead up, and we've got Paul. The Duke is dead, and the transition has happened, but it got backfired, so Harkonnens are still in control, and House Atreides is all but scattered, banned, and destroyed. And now we have Paul and Jessica living with the Fremen. Take it, Tony. We got to get through this, man.
All right,
so
what happens now? So they're living with the Fremen, and Paul basically is becoming Paul. Paul is becoming this super being. He's learning all this stuff, and he's getting power amongst the Fremen. He basically, over time, he becomes the quasi leader of the Fremen. And I say quasi because they have this, like, in their tribes, they have like the master of the Sieches, and they have these ritual leaders. So, but he's this like religious person to them. So he's getting more power amongst them, and they're seeing his powers. They're seeing what he can do as a superhuman. And when I say superhuman, I just mean like he uses the spice, and he uses his training to have these extraordinary abilities that he's trained for. It's not like he all these powers in these books are explained. It's not like he comes from the planet Krypton and he's a Superman. These powers are explained. The spice helps him, and he trains, and he moves his mind, and he moves his body, and he uses his mind to make his body do different things. So he's getting this power amongst the Fremen.
He's kind of like a martial artist in a way. You know,
Absolutely.
he's got supreme powers of control, and he's got great powers of his physical. He can fight, and that's one of the things that Tony was alluding to. The Fremen have this really sort of old school martial artist sort of survival of the fittest thing, where to be a leader of one of these communities, you have to kill the former leader.
Right.
There's no sharing of power amongst them. And so Paul is able to show his prowess because nobody can beat him in a fight.
And he's trained by his mother, who's a Bene Gesserit. So the Bene Gesserit, and the author doesn't specifically talk about martial arts, but they are basically like they have these specific martial art abilities that they've trained over generations, and they use each cell. They talk about it that the Bene Gesserit women can use their powers to control every single cell in their body, and they have these amazing fighting abilities. So Paul is trained to this end, and then he gains power amongst the Fremen. Meanwhile, there's this intrigue, this royal intrigue where the Harkonnens have control of the planet, but the Emperor, who was in on it with the Harkonnens, because the Emperor kind of wanted to get rid of the Atreides because the Atreides were gaining more power, and the Emperor is afraid of losing his power, right? So he used the Harkonnens to get rid of the Atreides. But Paul and the Fremen are now going out and they're destroying spice harvesters. They're disrupting the spice trade in the universe. But no one knows it's Paul. They think he's dead. The Emperor and the Harkonnens, they think Paul's dead. They think Paul Atreides is dead, and they think the Atreides are gone. They think he's just a straight up Fremen called Moadib. And Moadib is the name that his Fremen name. And he's got this other Fremen name, Usul, too, right? He's Usul, he's Moadib, he's Paul Atreides. He's got all these different names, which again, in like mythology and religious mythology, that's a very important human theme, right? We have these different leaders who have different names for different reasons. So you have Paul Atreides and the Fremen who are disrupting the spice trade, and you have the Harkonnens who are now getting crap from the Emperor. The Emperor's like, hey man, why I put you in charge of this planet to get rid of the Atreides, and now you're screwing me. You're not getting me the spice that I need. What's going on, man? And that's not how the Emperor talks at all, but that's how I talk sometimes. So you have this setup towards conflict, obviously. What happens then, Kyle?
We can rapidly speed towards the end. So
Yep.
basically, yeah, Tony put it right out there, and we had said it before. Paul understands, and I think he actually uses some of this, like these words.
Oh, like desert power.
He who controls a thing can destroy a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, it's almost like Paul is holding the thermal detonator, in Jabba's palace. There's going to be other parallels, but in a supremely scientifically dorky, fictiony way, that's what's happening. It's like you walking into a building and say, "Hey, I'm going to blow this place sky high unless you give me $1 million." It's like, so he's basically wielding the power of bringing the universe to its knees by destroying spice production forever, to say to everybody, "Fuck you," just like, and to go on this path. And so basically, that's the way the book culminates. There's probably some details. I'll leave it up to Tony if he wants to go any deeper, but that's what he does, is he wields this power of the ability to destroy something, to bring to a head this colossal power grab. And the other thing that I would say is that he also trains the Fremen, who, like I said before, exist in much larger numbers than anybody thought. He trains them to be even better fighters than they were, and they were already really, really badass fighters. So good, in fact, that we haven't talked about it. One of the things that makes the Emperor so powerful are his Sardaukar terror troops, which are basically these elevated level troops, legions of soldiers who just they're crushers. They just kick ass. They're born to these hard lives, and they're handpicked, and they're trained from when they're children, and they just turn into these monster fighting people, and no one can ever beat them. And Paul knows that one of the keys to his whole plan is using the Fremen, elevating their fighting power, even though they were already quite formidable. And the end game is that he brings the universe to its knees, and he totally bends the Emperor. He beats the Emperor. He beats the Sardaukar troops. He crushes the Harkonnens, and he wins. He wins. He wins. They win.
Fucking A, man. Fucking A.
And there's really some choice moments in that whole thing. He uses the sandworms in his victory. They use the outlawed atomics. That's another thing. Long ago, the power of the atom was banned for its destructive capability. And so they actually go against the rules of the Imperium, and they use atomics, not on people, but to destroy, I think, the shield wall.
The shield wall, right? And they get this one of the sandworms in there.
And they get one of the sandworms in there. And basically, they just bring the Emperor, the Harkonnens, they bring everybody to their knees, and there's this final showdown. And Paul Muad'Dib kicks ass.
Kicks ass. And okay, so that's it. That's basically it. And we won't say anything else about the plot of the book, because that's basically it. But what we just said, which is basically it, is so just one onion layer. Like there's so many onion layers. If you've never read the book and you like the show and you heard the synopsis and you read the book, it's going to be a completely different experience than what we just said. It's different for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that brings me to my next point, is what this book means to me and why this book is so important for me. And it really has actually this book has inspired me and inspired this show, actually, and I think inspired a lot of people. It maybe even had, I can't speak for this certainly, it may have inspired the person who wrote the Holographic Universe. I know it inspired George Lucas. George Lucas talked about how it inspired him. So if you're a Star Wars fan, basically you can thank a lot of Star Wars stuff to Dune. Dune was published in the 60s, I believe, Kyle, is that right? The first publication was in the 60s, is that correct?
Who, what?
Pay the fuck attention, Kyle. Was Dune first published in the 60s?
Yes.
So,
I believe it was the late 60s or maybe mid 65.
Yeah. So
I get that for you right now.
So Star Wars didn't even come out till, the late 70s.
65.
So all these really amazing, cool science fiction things that we have today were really inspired by Dune. So a lot of my thinking was inspired by Dune. And one of the reasons why I relate it to the Holographic Universe, and one of the reasons why I'm so inspired by Dune, is because of this possible human future in Dune is one in which they've rejected artificial intelligence, and they've rejected the power of the atom, like they called atomics. They've rejected a lot of this technology, and they've relied on their own brains to do it. And they use this spice. So we've talked about on the show about hallucinogenics and about the importance of drugs in our lives. So he's realistic. He says, okay, we've rejected these things, but we need to use other things to enhance human abilities. So that idea of enhancing human abilities and tapping into these different things in our universe and having a greater idea of things, it was really inspiring for me as a young man, and inspired this show, inspired everything. And so this book is super important to me for that reason. So like the Bene Gesserit, they use their minds and they use their enhanced abilities to do superhuman things, to do really crazy things. And so for me, that's not out of the realm of possibility. Even though this book is fiction, these things are not out of the realm of possibility. This is a very distinct possibility that this is what could happen in the actual human future, which is we reject certain things of technology that have been destructive and detrimental to our well-being, and then we take on certain things as humans that have a broader understanding of how the universe works, and we have different abilities. So this is a distinct possibility that these themes and these things in Dune could actually pan out in reality, not exactly the same way, but similar.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that, Tony, and I agree with all of it. Another thing that I would just add to that is that, you know, it's not like the author Frank Herbert is conjuring up a lot of these special powers out of total imagination. When and he talks about it, it's laid out really, really clearly, and he doesn't have to spend a lot of time explaining it. But those extrasensory, it's basically like extrasensory perception.
Right.
So it's not strictly reading somebody's mind. It's more about examining nuance and coming to logical and analytical conclusions.
Right.
So it's like it's picking up on the really, really microscopic details of normal behavior. So on a very, very base level, if you're talking to somebody that you suspect of somebody and you can see that they're sweating, or that they are, you know, that their veins on their neck is sticking out, you might say to yourself, wow, this person is getting squirmy. I feel like they're guilty of something. It's that to the nth degree. So it's not like, you know, these are things that the author is saying, you know, they're totally these are not imaginative powers. These are powers that we exhibit to a low level even now.
Good point.
But, you know, considering that we're way into the future and these powers have been expanded and studied and talked about and thought about and analyzed, they're at a much, much, much higher level.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I really like about it, is that it is incredibly imaginative, but it's also taps into something that's really normal. Um,
Absolutely. That's a good point, and it's almost like certain humans have become specialists at certain things, right? Like they kind of each have went to this certain path and became this extreme specialist in a certain thing. And actually, the original book touches on it, but I think later books really talk about it's hard to say, the Tlaxu. How do you say that one? How do you say that race? There's certain humans that basically clone other humans, and they manipulate cloning technology to make they call it a gola, which is like a clone that can then remember on the cellular level. And they have certain humans who create technology. The Ix create technology of spacecraft. They're not allowed to use artificial intelligence, but they kind of sneak a little in there. Even though the robots have been thrown away, the Ix kind of sneak it in there. So there's all these specialists, these human specialists in this universe. And I agree with Kyle that it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just that if in fiction, if it's 15,000 years, that in reality, it could be a lot sooner than that. In reality, it could only be hundreds of years before certain powers like this could exhibit themselves more in the human race. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. Another thing that he does to keep everything grounded and not too lofty is that even though there are major interesting themes and like we keep on sort of covering some of the same ground, imagination and space travel and all this other stuff, the humans in the book are still exhibiting the same shitty things that
Laws.
we exhibit now.
Yep.
Graft, corruption, we do horrible things to each other now,
Violence.
and
Yep.
violence. I mean, there's no enlightenment, really. I mean, there is, but there isn't. You know what I mean? It's not like we've become a peaceable people in this far future. Yes, we have mastery of all this stuff, but it's funny. It's almost like he's making a quick commentary on his understanding of the very basics of human psychology, which is that we'll never unbecome being base creatures.
Right.
We might be able to travel through space, and we might have a great understanding of how the mind works and all this other stuff, but we still murder each other in the name of politics and religion, and we're still on a quest for power. So you don't lose any of that stuff. So in a way, you know, that's one of the other reasons why I like the book, because it keeps you really, really deeply embedded in normative human experiences,
Right.
or at least what you see and hear in the news and what you know of history. And that's something that I think was really, really great too.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great. I I mean, I don't know, it's hard. We could just kind of go on and on forever about how great this is, but that's a really good point. That the book is so grounded in human emotion and human flaws and all that stuff. You know, a lot of science fiction kind of sometimes gets away from that. It kind of romanticizes the future. This does not romanticize a thing. This is like real down and dirty. You know, there's some cool stuff, but there's some messed up stuff, and that's reality. That's the universe. There's cool stuff and there's messed up stuff.
One thing I would add too is that for me, some of my favorite books have appendices, and this is no exception. Appendix 1, The Ecology of Dune. Appendix 2, a note on the Bene Gesserit, the religion of Dune. Appendix 3, a note on a report on the Bene Gesserit motives and purposes. There's all this really great stuff, and then of course terminology of the Imperium. There's a dictionary in it, for God's sakes. I mean, you need it. It's like, it's just really, really great. A great, great, great novel in
It's
every
like
way.
it's like the Lord of the Rings of the future.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it really is. It occupies the same place in my heart and mind. Close. Anyway, very close. But I like it for all the same reasons.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay. So, what else were we gonna say?
So so I kind of briefly touched on how this book inspired me, and how this book, how it really meant a lot. It meant a lot in my life. It's one of those books that it's like so many people have read it, but it's like it's yours. It's one of those books. There's not a whole lot of books that you feel like, wow, that's my book. That talks to me. There's not a whole lot of things that are written out there that people can say that. So that's one of those things that for me it was like, wow, that was speaking to me. That inspired me. So I'm curious, Kyle, like when you were younger, did you feel a similar way? Like, was this book inspiring to you, or was it just kind of like something that was fun or cool?
I perhaps maybe not to the level that you are saying. But like we had talked about on earlier shows, I'm kind of short on inspiration generally. But it does happen from time to time. I would say that it actually did, but maybe not in the direct way that you were inspired. I know that I often put this at the very top of my reading list, and I feel like it has inspired me in a less direct fashion. I definitely do think about it, and I channel the litany of fear against fear when I'm scared, which we're going to talk about in a few brief moments here. Um, so that's a tough one for me to answer. Yes and no, perhaps not at the same level as you. Regardless of whether or not I found it to be particularly inspiring, I find it to be immensely entertaining and really, really enjoyable, and I've tried to pass that on to many, many people. In fact, one of my best copies
Oh,
is
look at
from the
that.
Fox Lane High School, where I worked for several years, and I worked right as everything was getting digitized, and the library literally had me, I was a custodian, throwing away books, boxes and boxes and boxes of books of all kinds. And I had to go into the into the English department's reading closet and take boxes and boxes of Dune, and ostensibly to throw it away. Well, I didn't throw any of them away. I took boxes and boxes and boxes, and I gave them away for
Yeah, yeah,
years. I was like,
yeah.
here, have a copy of Dune. It's awesome.
Nice.
Here, have a
Yeah.
copy of Dune. It's awesome. So yeah, I was inspired. Yes.
That's really cool. I like that story, actually. That's good on you, Kyle. Nice job, buddy.
Thanks, buddy. Okay.
So, before we get into 80s movies wisdom, I just want to briefly say something about the extended Universe, and I'm going to be super brief because if you like Dune and if this show sounds fun, and if you've read the regular book, read all the different books. I've read them all, and the son, Brian Herbert, his son. So Frank Herbert wrote 6, and his son wrote, I can't even remember. His son wrote like 10 extra ones that take place 10,000 years before, and they take place right before the book, and they take place after the last one takes place. So which is 6,000 years in the future. So the entire Duneverse extends from 15,000 years or 16,000 years. I mean, that's crazy. That's a crazy Duneverse. But I want to say something. I want to give Kyle a little tidbit because I don't know if you've heard this. So one of the prequel books that was written about the Butlerian Jihad, it was like those books, like it totally goes all into that. Like it lays it all out. So the original Atreides, who was he was actually friends with the Harkonnen. The original Atreides and the Harkonnen were buddies. There were these two guys, and they were buddies, and they traveled around in space. And that was when there was AI, there were thinking machines. There was also these things called Titans, which were giant cyborgs. And this was kind of the culmination of human robot technology. And this is 10,000 years before Dune, right? And these Titans were these giant cyborgs who traveled in space and fucked shit up. Like they were good and they were bad. They basically did whatever they wanted, right? So one of these Titans, I think his name was Agamemnon. They have these like crazy, fun, cool names, right? So I think it was Agamemnon, I think. And he was this cyborg Titan, and he produced a human heir. He produced a human. I can't remember how. He produces a human, and it's a enhanced human. The human lived like a couple hundred years, and that was the first Atreides. So in the prequel book, the first Atreides was this enhanced human produced by this Titan cyborg. That was the first Atreides, and he was friends with a Harkonnen, and then shit went down, and then the Butlerian Jihad went down, and then the Atreides and the Harkonnens hated each other. So that's just a little tidbit. That's a tidbit of the expanded Duneverse. That's really fun for me. It was really fun for me, but there's like a million books. You know, there's a lot. You have to read a lot to get all this information.
That does sound rather intriguing, I must say. I don't know how we're doing on time.
We're getting close. We're doing well. We're getting to the end here.
Okay, so we don't have to go too deep, but the idea of the Butlerian Jihad, I think, has a lot of value right now.
Yeah.
Not that I'm ready to completely reject computers, obviously, but in recent days, weeks, months, years, as wonderful as technology is, because of what we're doing right now, we're having a podcast via Zoom from different places in the country. I've been saying to myself, I need to simplify, you know? I mean, we could talk about this at another time. I know my timing's off, but I think that's just another example of Frank Herbert's forward thinking, in that saying that, you know, there might come a time when technology is going to become more of a burden than a boon. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we're approaching that time right now, but I know that there are moments where I say to myself, you know what? Damn this digital life, you know? Like, damn this digital life of ours.
Absolutely.
It's been happening more and more to me.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the books before and the books after, AI is central to those books. So I don't want to. I'm not going to spoil those. You got to read them. Kyle, read them. The audience out there, read them. So the point in Dune, in that Duneverse, where they don't have machines, was just one point in human history, but the rest of the Duneverse, it's much different. So check it out, man. It's pretty cool. And because I mean, and that was so forward thinking from Frank Herbert. He wrote that in 1965, and his son, you know, they published those a long time ago, and they're so pertinent to what's going on, and it's so I think it may have inspired, you know, movies like The Matrix and all those movies, because that came out, all that stuff was way before that. These AI problems in these books were one of the first science fiction books to really cover that kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
So
pretty
that's
amazing, pretty far seeing.
pretty far seeing, absolutely. Okay, so that's going to move us to 80s movies wisdom. Now you're thinking, whoa, you guys just talked about Dune. Now you're going to 80s movies wisdom. Well, haha, surprise. We're going to talk about Dune, which was the movie that came out in the 80s, which was David Lynch's version of Dune, which was okay. It was an amazing movie, but we're going to talk about some wisdom that they talk about in that movie. So read the book. Hopefully you'll see the new movie, but the old movie, I mean, it's fun. What do you think, Kyle?
It's David Lynch, man. I'm not a big fan. Some people love his stuff. I honestly, I gotta be, full disclosure, I have not watched Twin Peaks. But Blue Velvet didn't really do it for me. His version of Dune, it had its moments,
Wasn't that wasn't that the same head? Paul Atreides, wasn't he played by the guy in Blue Velvet?
Yeah, Kyle MacLachlan.
So David Lynch's Dune is kind of like the sci-fi Blue Velvet.
Kind of, yeah. I just didn't really like it stylistically, and I mean, there were moments that were pretty cool, but it was a very dark movie. It was raw. It was visceral, which I'm not opposed to raw and visceral. I just didn't like David Lynch's version of it, vision of it. So, mostly from a stylistic standpoint, although it does deserve noting that the original version he wrote was 4+ hours long. And so if you ever get your hands on the original version, it does give you a little extra depth, although it's written or shown in a strange way. There's storyboards and narration in addition to actual cinematic footage. So it's strange, but I like that. Also, and we're not going to have time to talk about this, but are you familiar with? I haven't even watched it. Jodorowsky's Dune.
No, I didn't see that one.
Okay, so we're going to save that for another time. But apparently, it wasn't supposed to be David Lynch's project at all. It was supposed to go to this guy named Jodorowsky, who had a completely different version. The whole thing went bluey, and David Lynch took over. There's actually a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune that's out that says, oh, it was a totally different vision. Anyway, David Lynch's, I didn't really love it. There were some great actors in it, and it had its moments, but yeah, wasn't really my favorite. I'm really looking forward to the new one that's coming out, just because it's why not? Why
Yeah,
not?
I think it'll be fun. I don't have high expectations. I think Dune is the type of book and the type of the Duniverse. I think it's the type of thing that I think that ultimately it's not the screen version can never do justice to the book version. I think it's going to be that type of thing. So have fun with it. It's never going to do it justice. But in the Dune movie in the 80s, they talk about there is a scene where they do the fear litany. Kyle mentioned it before. This is from the book. This is directly from the book. I'm going to read it directly from the book, but it was in the movie. So technically, this is 80s movies wisdom, but in reality, this is Dune wisdom. Yes,
Well,
Kyle.
tell us first, Tony, what was the litany against fear?
I have it. I'm going to read it.
No, not the words. Like what was it
Oh.
though?
So this was a Bene Gesserit. Remember we talked about the Bene Gesserit. This was a Bene Gesserit saying to help basically calm the mind when you have a situation where you're afraid or where it's very difficult. And it's cool how, even though these people had enhanced abilities, they were still humans and they still had fear. It's possible we'll never get rid of fear as long as we're humans. So they understood that. So they have this litany, this thing that they would say in their heads to try and calm themselves. In this particular scene, Paul Atreides is being tested by one of the Bene Gesserits before he goes to Arrakis, when he's still a young pup on Caladan, and it's the beginning of the book. And she comes and she tests him, and actually she tests him to the death.
I love
Right?
that. I love that
The
part.
Gom Jabbar, right? And you have to read the book because it's really cool. I can't explain everything.
So cool.
It's
So
so
cool.
cool. And so Paul's being tested, and he's like, but he's got this training from his mother. His mother, the Bene Gesserit, gave him this training in this litany, and he's being tested. It's very crazy. And he's going, okay, I got to relax my mind. And this is what he says to himself. He says, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain.
And let me tell you, it works.
It does.
Okay. I've been out in the woods at night and I've heard something like I thought was an animal or a prowler or a marauder or something. And I'm like, you know, like panic or something. But the few times I've actually used it, I said, you know, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will not fear. I'll face my fear. I will turn around. And then the best part is, when I turn around and see it, it's not there. Only I'm there. And that's what's happened every single time. It's gone. And then you can continue your walk in the woods. It's pretty remarkable.
I'm with you. And I mean, in my case, like when I had some medical issues and like when I had some surgeries on my arm and stuff, and I used it for that. Like I was like afraid of, of surgeries. And I was like, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Let the fear pass through me and only I will remain. And it just calms you down. It just helps you bring you down to a calmer level. It's really cool how like it actually works. Like I'm the same way. I've done it.
And again, a perfect example of this recurring sort of idea that Frank Herbert has these amazing imaginative powers, but what he's doing there is nothing that people haven't done in some form or another for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Saying, you know what? It's all in your head. You're just imagining it. Breathe deeply, turn around and face it, and you'll see that it's all in your mind. And so, again, it just keeps the whole book on a level where you can say, oh, I've been in that situation. You know what I mean? And maybe I've used that, but not in the same way. But I know what that's like. And then even to use his words in particular as a mantra, you know what I mean? It really is quite effective. It sort of puts a formal spin on an old technique that may or may not be shown to you by your parents or something.
Perfect. You said it all, man. So that was it. That was the Dune Show. Hope you enjoyed it. That was not just the Dune Show. That was the Holographic Baldcast.
Holographic Baldcast.
Kyle, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, man. That was a lot of fun.
Go read the book Dune. We love it. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being with us. This is the Holographic Baldcast signing off.